Part C and Part B 619 programs are recognizing the importance of creating a culture of data use and supporting data teams to effectively use data at the local and state levels. We are glad that you are joining your colleagues from the DaSy Data Culture Learning community to learn about efforts to build a culture of data use and reflect on your state or program's data culture. Resources, including the DaSy Data Culture Toolkit, will be discussed. And we're going to turn it over for introductions, and we'll start with Brenda.
Hello, everybody. This is Brenda Sharp. I'm the Part C coordinator from Louisiana.
And Lisa.
Hi, this is Lisa Backer from warm and wonderful Minnesota, and I have the pleasure of supervising the CN 619 systems here at the Minnesota Department of Education.
And I'm Heidi Bernstein with the DaSy Center at West.
Great. Great. And thank you, Brenda, Lisa, and Heidi. A strong data culture results when an organization believes in continuous improvement and regularly puts that belief into practice. Local agencies, schools, and districts that have strong data cultures emphasize collaboration as a keystone for success, and they empower teachers, providers, administrators, and program leaders to make decisions for which they will be held accountable. Elements of a strong data culture include commitment, vision, beliefs, accountability, collaboration, modeling, and commitment to ongoing instructional and programmatic improvements. Culture does not change because we desire to change it. Culture changes when the organization is transformed. The culture reflects the realities of people working together every day. Francis Hesselbein, who is one of the great leaders of our time. So what ingredients do we need to build a data culture? And this information comes from Whole Whale. We highly recommend that you take a look at when you get an opportunity. So we can see that Whole Whale tells us that data culture consists of people, which is 50%, process, which is 30%, and then product at 20%. So what does this mean? When it comes to people, people are the key to building and sustaining a data culture. Everyone in the organization must be part of it, and people at all levels must recognize the importance of embracing data and using an analytic approach to decision making. Again, the emphasis is on people at all levels. Questions to consider or ask along the way: what is the staff structure as it relates to data reporting? Do staff members have the training they need to understand relevant data? Do staff members understand how to glean insights and actionable steps from data? So this is very important. So what do we do with the data once we spend our time and our resources to collect, analyze, interpret the data? How do we turn that into action? As in terms of the process, in a labor market where the average employee, oh, can you go back? Thank you. Where the average employee spends less than 5 years at a job, it is important to have strong structures in place to institutionalize data knowledge. Data insights and findings from past years should be maintained for posterity to inform later employees, and maintaining records of prior decision-making also saves time when similar issues arise in the future. Documentation is key. The flow of data does not stop at the data analyst, but reaches members at all levels of the organization. So key considerations are staff accessing and communicating data across teams well? Do staff act on data or regularly share learnings from the analysis? How often do staff receive data feedback? So you could see communication is key. Without the people, the process will not work. And finally, products. There are many tools and services that can help support a data culture. Products such as briefs, reports, and dashboards to be considered to disseminate the information that's gleaned from the data. Knowing your audience is key in order to know what product to develop and how to get your information to your stakeholders, to your audience. Questions to ask. Are tools in place to analyze large data sets, Excel, SPSS, SAS, something else? Are consistent naming and storage conventions in place across databases? Are dashboards and metrics updated as automatically as possible? And is data stored in a way that reporting can be done across the organization? As we move along today's session, please keep these questions in mind. How do they relate to what is happening in your state and across your local programs or your local education agencies? So we'll pause here for a moment in terms of your data culture work. What are 1 to 2 things that you are working on right now to enhance your data culture?
You can either put that in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand now and tell us, let us know. Are we seeing anything in the chat?
Yes, from Nicole, she said we have a data users group in Connecticut. Great. From Jason, we have quarterly dashboard. Anyone else?
Those are good public vehicles for data culture.
Yes, and in terms of having a data users group, that's an excellent idea. You have support there to help build that data culture. So when people go back to their offices or their agencies, you have champions of the work and can help spread the word and build a community. Quarterly dashboards are a great way to reach your stakeholders. And again, just as a reminder, if you would like to speak, just raise your hand and Kellen will be able to unmute you.
So in a minute, we're going to go ahead and talk about.
And then just real quick, let's jump back to the chat. There were a few others that came in. In Nevada, we are implementing a new data system, and I think it has helped us to examine what data culture looks like. Great. And from Lynn, improving our data system and asking questions about what we need to know.
Good.
Okay, thank you. And here we have a poll. How familiar are you with the Data Culture Toolkit? So please take a moment and provide your answers.
All right, we have about 53% of you have responded. Just to give you a few more seconds. Yeah. All right, last chance, and I'll share the results.
Well, I'm glad that a lot of you are on this call then so that we can show you what the Data Culture Toolkit is and walk you through it, because I'm going to do that next. And so for the people who have used it, what have you used on it? Can you put that into the chat? Okay, so we can close that, and I'm going to bring up the toolkit and walk us through it a little bit. So on the DaSy Center here, we have DaSy Resources, and if you go to Products, and then you go all the way down to Toolkits, you can click on Toolkits. And here are all of the DaSy toolkits that we have. The Data Culture Toolkit, which we're going to talk about today, is the first one. But it's really good to take a look at some of these other toolkits too, because they're all really, really informative. We've given webinars on all of them. And so, but they're good toolkits. So I'm going to click on the Data Culture Toolkit, and you'll come to the home page. And so the way the toolkit is structured is that anything that's written in blue, if you hover over it, you'll get a definition of that piece. So here's a definition of data teams. Here's a definition of infographics, okay? The toolkit is divided up into 6 different sections. Each section is fairly short so that it keeps you moving through. So if we click on the introduction, the way it's set up is that in this top corner, in each of the sections, it'll tell you what all the other sections are if you want to jump to them. And then you'll have this first section here, and again, the blue is to hover over and to get a definition if you need that. So in the introduction, we talk about why is a culture of data use important? And we have this nice graphic here about the key activities that you would use to build a culture of data, and having a formalized team, assessing your data culture, assessing your data quality, prioritizing your information, your critical questions, and exploring the team, the data to inform your decision making. And they were all interactive, and that's why the arrows are going in all of the different ways. So, so if you look at that, and then I'm going to jump. So if we go into, say, the assessing your data culture here, you have a section on building effective and sustainable cultures of data use and having data-informed decision-making process. So in here are 3 different tabs that you can go to understand what's going on. So if you go into the first one, it's data-informed decision-making. And in here, we talk about the ACT, Plan, Study, Do model, and how that is helpful for the for decision making, and it gives you that graphic. And if I go into the barriers of data culture, you'll get a nice infographic on the barriers. And so if you go into, say, here, where you see in the green, identifying, addressing barriers to data use, you get a worksheet so that I can open this worksheet, and then you can print it out, and you can have barriers to data use. Were they cultural? Were they technical? Were they political kind of barriers? How significant was that barrier, and what would you need to address that barrier? So here's some worksheets that you can use when you're working through it. So let me see if I can now get back. Okay, and then so that's that, and then if we go into data culture and self-assessment, we have um, we have the data culture self-assessment tool. So I'm going to open that up. I think you're going to hear more about this later. So if we have the data culture self-assessment tool, we have the data use. It's based on the data subcomponent use of the DaSy framework. And if you look here, you've got a rating of how you're setting up teaming, how you're setting up data management, how you're doing data-formed inquiries, and monitoring and communication. And where are you in your process in setting up a data team? Have you not implemented it, or you at initial? And you may want to take pieces of this and look at this, and then look at how your data teams are set up. So escape back. Okay. And so if I go back to the toolkit home, then, oh, I didn't mean to go back that far. I'm going to show you one more piece of it. Brenda, which one were you using? You were using the...
We use the, hold on, go to that page, the Teaming Plan Considerations Worksheet.
Okay, so in the Teaming Plan Considerations Worksheet, you used and asked these basic questions to set it up. And there's here's the worksheet. We can open it up, and you have basically what's the name of your data team, what's the purpose of your data team, and you have all these questions that come in here, and you can put in your notes. And then this corresponds to I'm a little awkward here because I'm also on the Zoom. It goes to the teaming template as you ask these questions. Then if you wanted to come up with a goal, purpose, goals, and your teaming process and set up a document of what's going on, you can take those questions and then put it together into here so that you can set up a template of like, what's your purpose and what's your approach and what are your guidelines that you're doing, what's your goals and activities, what kind of data system, data collections do you have, and then what's your process for a team. So how long are you going to meet for? Who's your membership? What kind of coordination and facilitation do you have? And what's your frequency and your location of meetings? And then what's your communication progress? And what are you doing there? So there's all these useful tools in here, and it also allows you to bring out these templates and have these templates and use it and adapt them to your own way. So one more thing that I want to show you before I turn it over to to Brenda and Lisa, is this very last section. If you find it something in the toolkit that you like, but you can't remember where you saw it, if you go to this last section, all of the tools that we have here are listed, and you can click right from here into them. And like Tony mentioned, the whole whale that we like. So you can click on this and get into that blog and read more about the whole whale and get to that site. And then all of the resources, all of the self-assessment, the barriers worksheet, all of those things are in here, and they're all listed in the back. So that's an overview of the toolkit. I'm going to go back into presentation mode. Nope, that was not it. Okay. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Brenda. Were there any questions quickly on that, on the toolkit? Okay, so I'll turn it over to Brenda. Brenda, just tell me when to advance the slides for you.
Okay, I will. Well, thank you everyone for giving me the opportunity to share the work we've been doing in Louisiana to build and support a data culture, and why this idea of data culture was appealing, and also why we took a teaming approach to building our data culture. This started back in phase 1 and 2 of the SSIP work, when we were doing our infrastructure analysis and data analysis. We were getting feedback through regional focus groups using a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Our structure in Louisiana is we have 9 regions and 9 regional coordinators who are responsible for the activities in their region. So each of those focus groups was taking place in one of their regions. And based on the results of the feedback that we were getting, and in order to address some of the needs in our SSIP, we asked our staff to develop, with the teams that participated in the SWOT analysis, some local improvement plans. And we felt like this was also a good experience with leading them, our staff that is, through an improvement activity at their level, where they would act as a team leader for that. So, for example, some of the things they identified that they wanted to work on in their local improvement plans was turnover in service coordinators, transition to our developmental disability service system, addressing provider shortages, etc. So they each developed a plan, and when we would have our monthly or calls or quarterly meetings, they were reporting on their improvements, but it was very process-oriented. So they would take their work plans and they would say what they had accomplished since the last report, but it wasn't very data-driven. They could say maybe, for example, the region that was working on provider shortages, well, we enrolled 5 physical therapists last month, or we had no turnover in service coordinators in our region for 6 months. But for example, going back to the provider shortages area, if we, as many states, have increased enrollment of children, and so if you have more children in a region and you enrolled 5 physical therapists, does that address the need? Have you really accomplished much? So we wanted to really be more mindful about how we were using our data. So you can go to the next slide, Heidi. So to provide a context for some of this work, we made 2 infrastructure improvements as part of our phase 3 year work, phase 3 year 1 work. We designated, we have provider shortages, as I mentioned, and that was one of the areas we wanted to improve. So the availability of service resources was a focus for our improvement. And also, we made changes in the measurement of our child outcome process. So we knew that in order to make sure that these things were resulting in change in the areas that we were focusing on, we developed some reports to look at these two change areas, and we asked our regional staff to review the reports and report the results at a staff meeting or at a phone call, etc. So for example, back to the service availability area, we reviewed our protocols for what teams are supposed to do when they identify that there's a shortage. We developed a module for training to make sure that the protocol was being followed. We provided the training. We developed a report to look at the data. And within about a quarter, we noticed that we weren't seeing improvement in the numbers. And so we knew that, and when we went back in and looked, we identified that the teams were immediately going back to what they were doing before, not what we had trained them to do. And so using good implementation fidelity, we knew we needed to address this in a more, in a way that where we could monitor the improvement. So we began looking at how are our teams making decisions, were they following the protocols that we had developed, and were they comfortable with reviewing the data, and what were they doing with the data, were they even looking at the data. So you can go on to the next slide. So we developed a more formal process to monitor implementation fidelity. As I mentioned, we developed some reports, and we asked the regional staff to review the reports and report what they were finding. I had a real aha moment at this point because I realized that some of our staff had very little ability to manipulate an Excel spreadsheet, for example. And so they were looking at information, but they weren't really able to analyze it in any kind of logical way. And then we also discovered that our typical process, which is that first bullet on the slide for reviewing data, was also part of the problem. So for example, for this resource availability report that we developed, we would generate the report at the state level, and then we would disaggregate it by region, send it out to the regional staff for review, and then they would go in and follow up with the individual agencies. So when I realized that our staff had some limitations in how they were analyzing data, was about that time that DaSy proposed their Data Culture Learning Community, which is going to have a series of monthly calls and discussions. And so I asked if we could sign up our whole team. So all of our regional staff and all of our central office staff signed up to participate so that we could not only get the information, but as a group we would all be familiar with the content. So each month there was a webinar, and then we would follow up with our monthly calls to discuss activities, etc., that we wanted to do. And so one of the areas of content, and Heidi showed you the document, was the Teaming Plan Considerations Worksheet. And it asks a series of questions about a data team. So since each of our regional staff had local improvement plans and they were working with teams, we asked them to complete the worksheet with what they were currently doing with their group and why they were doing it and what activities they had underway. So it really helped them break out the components of what a plan for reviewing data and using data with a team might look like. And we felt like this would be a way for them to build on their skills as data users. They then reported what the results of their thinking through the worksheet, and then when we had our next call, we added some additional questions just to sort of get the discussion across all the groups was like. So here's what we learned, and that's the third bullet on the slide. We learned that our staff was doing all the work. So that meant that either we at the state level or at the regional level were generating the reports, and then the regional staff would take the results to their team, and they would say, well, what are we going to do about this? You know, your agency's not having improvement here. So what that did was it made the agencies sort of reactive and defensive. They felt like they were being criticized for the work that they were doing, and the staff themselves felt like it was a punitive conversation. They didn't even like to do this activity, and so they were avoiding it. So by using this approach, we found that when all the information is shared with the team itself, they are doing the analysis as a group, and they get more buy-in. They're actually seeing the results themselves and talking about it at their level rather than having it presented to them as a done deal. And then, so what we've done since then, we've provided some training activities with each other to build some of our own capacity using Excel, and they are reporting regularly with quarterly activities that they're doing with their local teams. And so they specify which team they're working with and which activities they're working on. And then they're also, when they're meeting with their teams in the agencies themselves, they are meeting as a group, so with the supervisor and with the staff. So for example, at an agency that is responsible for service coordination, they meet with the supervisors there and with the whole team so that everybody can hear how everyone in the agency is improving their activities rather than just, you know, sort of pointing the finger at one group. Tomorrow, we're having one of our calls, and I realized I was sort of contributing to some of the problem by, when I would prepare the report, I would, when I would review it and before sending it out, I would put in some things to help them make decisions about where they needed to look. So for tomorrow's call, I sent them each their report, and I said I would like for them to review the report, and then I just gave them a list of things to review and summarize. So I didn't give them the means to do it. I didn't filter it for them. I didn't say sort this by the date of the authorization. None of that. Based on the work that we've done in these past few months, I'm really hoping that they will have the skills they need to respond to a list of about 5 points that we would then like for them to come back and report on. So I'll give you an update in a few months and see if this approach is working. But I feel that as a result of this, that people are more engaged in looking at the data that they have and making decisions from it. Someone had made the comment about, at the beginning, about developing a new data system and knowing what questions to ask. And we had done that as well. And we added a built-in report as a result of some of the discussion. And even though the staff said they wanted this report, they weren't using it. So that's just to add an example of how just having information available doesn't make it meaningful to people until you have a process for building the culture of data use, essentially, is what that leads up to. So that's where we are. That's the work we've done and where we are at this point.
Thank you, Brenda. That was really, really very informative and interesting to understand how, you know, until they really feel that they're part of the process, then it can feel punitive. And so
that's right.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Hi, everyone. This is Lisa Backer from Minnesota, and I was asked to talk about some of the actions that our state has taken to assess a data use culture. And I'll be perfectly honest, when we started this work, we weren't thinking about it as a culture, but that's certainly the direction in hindsight that we were moving. Like most of you, we did a very formal, Heidi, let's move the slide. We did a formal infrastructure analysis as part of our phase 1 SSIP. And we chose to use the ECTA and DaSy frameworks to really get a handle on our state infrastructure. And if you reflect on some of the quality indicators that are part of those tools, there are statements that say, well, at the state and local levels. And we had a really great handle on what was happening at the state level and not such a good handle on what was happening at the local level. And when I use the term local level, Minnesota is an ed lead state for Part C, and we really operate in a birth to 5 fashion. So our local school districts and the local program leaders really are responsible within their school districts for services for infants, toddlers, and preschoolers with disabilities, birth to kindergarten entrance, and in some cases, birth to age 8. So we surveyed all of our local program leaders and we made it a requirement. Each and every one of them did it. And they did this local infrastructure analysis from both a Part C and a preschool special ed perspective. And our self-assessment is called Inspire Action, which is a phrase stolen from one of my favorite authors, organizational expert, Simon Sinek, who's wrote a book called Start With Why, How Great Leaders Inspire Everyone to Take Action. Heidi, would you advance the slide? So our Inspire Action framework focuses on these core components of program quality. So it's identification, natural or least restrictive environment, services being coordinated, and so on. And you can see that the ON in action is ongoing data-driven improvement. And we split this core component of quality into 2 separate subcomponents. One focused on how do local programs collect and report data, and then how do local programs actually use data. And I will admit to Brenda that like you, I had this aha moment several years ago that in spite of our best efforts to create data sets for local districts, our program leaders lacked the skills to do anything with them. And so we did 6 regional trainings one year on how to sort and filter and make pivot tables and make charts. And when we got the results from Inspire Action back, we learned that we had pretty much not made a difference at all in their use of data. So Heidi, if you change the slide. So this slide shows for our Part C and 619 perspectives how our leaders and their local teams rated themselves on the components that were part of Inspire. And then if you turn one more slide, you'll see how action and obviously ongoing data use was by far our lowest area as a state. And some of the things that they reflected on in data collection were what were their local processes and policies around data collection? How were they providing professional development or technical assistance to all staff in their local systems that played a role in collecting and reporting high quality data? What were those local quality assurance processes and procedures? And then with data use, we focused on, do local programs actually have a stated vision and mission and measurable programmatic goals? Were they using a continuous improvement or plan, do, study, act cycle? Had they involved stakeholders in the data to provide multiple perspectives on what some of the actions coming out of that data analysis might be? Had they identified critical questions that they were driven to have the answers to, and were they using data-driven decision making? And you can see from our pretty obvious results that we had a long way to go back in 2014 when these data were collected on really driving good data use. So so local programs leaders and staff were not choosing to use their discretionary time to conduct data analysis. And that was the glaring barrier that was identified, that there's the day you plan and there's the day you have. And that oftentimes their discretionary time was taken up by emerging issues within their districts, and they just struggled to make really putting data to use a priority. Some indicated a lack of skill despite our best efforts. Very few districts had improvement plans that were truly data driven. And comments included just a sense from local programs that because Minnesota has some very large districts in the metro area, and we also have a lot of really small districts. And they felt that their data sets were really just too small to use to drive meaningful conclusions. So if, Heidi, if you'd move it one more time. So here's some of our less formal data assessment strategies. We do a lot of face-to-face gatherings with our local program leaders and providers. And so we rely on those evaluations both to tell us how we did, but also to inform us in an ongoing way how they're doing and what else they feel they need in order to improve program effectiveness in all aspects, including data use. We started a regionally representative leadership team where elected leaders from each region of our state come together multiple times each year to help the state engage on challenging issues, including data use. And then we have a team of 10.0 professional development facilitators in our state who are each assigned a local program leader to partner with and be that guide on the side. And so our professional development facilitators have provided us a lot of anecdotal information about the challenges among their assigned program leaders in data use. So Heidi, if you'd move one more time. So here are some of the things that we've done based on what we learned. And these are things that are part of our SIP. We used to use the phrase evidence, inference, and action to help them engage with their data. And that was something that many of you may remember Kathy Hebler saying back in the day when we were starting with our outcomes use. And we changed evidence, inference, and action to look, think, and act. Look at your data, think about it and attach a meaning, and then act on that meaning. And so just simplifying the words has helped people engage with their data. At the state level, we really are investing in our data infrastructure. We've integrated many of our data sets, and we are pushing dashboards out to local programs using Tableau, using a secure external server so a district leader can log in, pull down a dashboard, and their integrated data is available to them so that they can look at their teams or their kids' outcomes, disaggregated instantly by race, ethnicity, or intensity of services provided, or a child's primary disability or instructional setting. And so we really have made those significant investments in partnership with our state regular early childhood programs to help all early childhood programs that are school-based in our state make better use of data. And then we really are working to make data a part of those connection points between state staff and local programs. So when we get together, when we have our monthly leadership calls, when our professional development facilitators are working with their local program leaders, data are always part of those discussions. So if you want to flip the slide one more time, that's it for me.
So thank you, Lisa. That's really interesting. And I also agree that it's sometimes hard, and sometimes people are afraid to manipulate an Excel sheet because it's just they're afraid they're going to move around all the data or whatever. And so so it's it's just something, it's a learning curve on all of that. But I really like the way you simplified to look, think, and act also. I think that that's just very intuitive. Okay, so we're going to open it up a little bit more to discussion now. So based on what you've learned today, how might you use the data toolkit, and what kind of information that you've learned from Lisa and Brenda today that also might be useful? So either raise your hand, because we're not that large of a group at the moment, or write into the chat what your thoughts are at the moment. Or any questions that you have about the Data Culture Toolkit, or questions for Lisa or Brenda or Tony or I. Anything coming in?
Here we go. This is from Melissa. We will be examining if we are doing our best or assuming that we are doing our best to collect and analyze the data.
Good.
From Donna, raise hand. Oh, and just a reminder to raise your hand. The icon is at the bottom of the screen. You can scroll over the bottom of the screen, it'll pop up.
So does Donna want to say something, Kellen?
Oh, I will unmute her, but she was probably just reminding folks, but I unmuted her if she would like to.
Nope.
Nope.
Any other thoughts?
If the barriers they mentioned.
Donna didn't mute herself. So.
All right, so we're going to move here. So going forward, I think, Tony, this is yours, but...
Oh, just one more. There is one more that is on the chat. This is from Melissa again. I think that for us, we have to look at this as a whole system issue rather than top down, which is really popular for us as an organization. And I do want to address that. I think that's a great point. I think in a way that's addressed in whole whale. And I know this is something that we talk about on our team as well, is that leadership can come from anywhere in terms of driving the culture of data. And it doesn't have to be from an administrator, but in fact can and should come from anybody to help lead that effort.
And going back to the barriers piece, as you see a barrier, as you break down those barriers, then you can turn those into strengths or use some of the other strengths that you have to help break down those barriers. So, you know, pairing people together, somebody who is strong at something, or teaming in a way. And I know that even in rural areas where teaming is tougher, you can think globally now because we're all on Zoom and internet and everything else. So like a team doesn't have to necessarily be anymore sitting around in one room together. So, you know, people can team across the state. So just the fact that it's somebody small, and then that data culture can, even if you're not sharing the exact same data, but two small areas could have the same kind of data issue needs. So thinking more globally like that to inform your data culture is good.
And Heidi, we have another post from Holly. It was very helpful to hear about some of the same issues surrounding data and some of the barriers, such as assuming that districts have the essential knowledge just to sort data.
Mm-hmm. I was in another state and we spent 2 hours of a workshop just on how to open up Excel, how to set up a data file, and how to sort. I mean, it's not intuitive to some people. Other thoughts? Any other ways that we at the DaSy Center can support you? And okay. So if you have further questions, you can always reach out to us And we hope that you go and look at the DaSy Center and look at the toolkits and look at this toolkit more in depth. It was just a very quick overview. And that you use these materials because we certainly spent a lot of time creating them. So we really, really hope that people get some good use out of them. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. And we'll close out the meeting now.
Okay, will do, Heidi. Thank you all.
Thank you.